It's all going to start with a Stryfe in this case. So we're going to need to unbox this one. Now we can get rid of the 6 clip because it's pretty much useless. Then we'll start by unscrewing the battery tray. So now that that's off, we can flip it over, and then we can remove these 2 stickers and pretty much just start unscrewing everything. In order to not lose all the screws, I like using a magnetic parts tray. However, you could use any sort of copper holder that you want. I just like this one because the screws stick to it. Okay, now with all the screws removed, we can open up the blaster. Don't worry too much if some of the residue from the sticker right here doesn't come all the way off, because we'll be sanding the blaster quite a bit. Okay, now we'll pretty much remove everything you see in here. It also helps to have like a bin or something to hold all the parts in. So you are going to have to cut out some of the wiring. Most of it comes out pretty easily. However, you're going to have to cut here and here with some wire cutters just to fully remove it from the blaster. Then these bits down here is really the only full system you'll have to save of little pieces. And then in terms of little pieces, you also have this guy up here, which is where little sights and stuff clip on, so don't forget to remove that because people tend to forget it and then it flies out because it is a spring and then you'll never find it again. So now our Stryfe shell is completely empty. So if you are following along, exactly, the only pieces you'll really need to keep from the stock Stryfe is the pusher and the little spring that goes with that, the trigger, the rev trigger and the spring associated with that, and then the catch mechanism for the magazine. Then you can pretty much get rid of all this other junk. If you're not following along exactly, or if you want to go with a bit of a cheaper build, you don't want to spend as much, you can keep the stock flywheel cage, flywheels, motors. What some people like to do is, if they're just doing a very simple mod, you can just remove these, throw in some clean wiring, and then you should be pretty good to go. You can use that with stock batteries, it'll give you some improvement. However, if you're going to go with like a full overhaul like this one's going to be, those are really the only pieces you need to keep. In terms of internals, there's always those external orange pieces as well that we removed earlier. So now we are going to start the long and pretty tedious process, but very important process nonetheless, of sanding. Basically we have to sand this whole thing down so that it'll better accept paint. Like removing this paint is important to getting good paint on the handle, and also do some light shell modification. Now I'm going to be removing the Nerf logo, a lot of this warning text that's kind of hard to see right here. There's a digital camo text sort of printed on the blaster that I don't really like, and then just making some like slight modifications like to the grip. I'm going to be sanding that down to remove the scaling. Just sort of general things like that really do improve the aesthetic when I paint it, because I don't want those things to show up in the paint job. I'm going to start out at 120 grit and work my way up higher, but 120 will be the primary sander for this. So I'm almost done with this side of the shell. I still have a few places to hit up with the 120 before I move on to the other side, but this is just sort of a quick comparison so you can see the importance of properly sanding the blaster before you actually paint it. Like I said, this is just round 1 for me, but it's the most tedious and long of the rounds of sanding with the 120, because you're actually removing a lot of the material, whereas like a 200 and 400 grit round will go a fair bit faster because we're really just finishing it off. We're not removing nearly as much material. If you need a break from sanding, you could work on your battery tray. You need to use pliers to pull out these 2 metal sections, and then I'm going to Dremel out this top section that I marked off in black Sharpie up here, just to make more room for the battery, and we're going to have to remove these little plastic pieces in the middle as well. Okay, so now that we've finished sanding, we've done our 120 coat and our 300 in this case. You could do like 200 or 300, it's probably fine. And then if I was going to do this as like a sort of clean paint job, I'd probably wet sand it at like 400 or 500 and then call it a day. But because we're going to do a sort of worn paint job, I really didn't feel that was necessary. To prime it, we could either use vinyl dye, which is good because it actually dyes the plastic, which is good because it's pretty durable. And then I'm actually pretty out of that, so I'm going to use the primer and filler. But really, either one of these products should be fine for your base coat. So I hit this up with some gray primer, and then I went with sort of, it was supposed to be a hammered finish paint from Rust-Oleum, but the hammering finish only showed up in certain areas. It's kind of hard to catch with that glare. However, like down here, definitely it looks more hammered, and like just certain areas around the blaster, it's not really a big deal since it's basically going to be a weathered paint job anyway. However, it was just a little weird. That may actually be because of the cold weather up here. It's actually probably too cold to be painting, but I did it in our garage, and then I just closed the garage after to try to keep some heat in, so that could be affecting the paint. It's actually going to be warmer this weekend, so I'm trying to finish this paint job so I can clear coat it along with a few other things. Just a quick note I forgot to mention earlier, but when you prime it is really the optimal time to sort of look for any tiny flaws in your bodywork and correct them before you actually go on to paint. It's much harder to do after that. So really take a good look over your blaster. Don't be afraid to sand it a few more times, or even prime with a gap filler primer. Do a wet sand and then prime it again just to be on the safe side. If you're unsure, just sand it again. You probably won't regret it as much as if you left a spot in, then painted it, and then noticed it later, because it's much harder to fix. For this project, I actually 3D printed a very special battery cover. It's kind of hard to read. However, it says danger high voltage, and it has the associated warning signal for that. So basically I'm going to sand this. I'm going to give it a prep work with some XTC 3D, which has a pretty good glossy, smooth finish. So once I sand it and do that, it should be fairly unrecognizable as 3D printed. I'm going to paint it, and then I'm going to fill in the lettering with like a different color paint so that it sort of pops out and really you can see it on the blaster. That'll also sort of help to go with the paint job theme and really help it tie the blaster together. Plus that's where the LiPo is, so it actually is high voltage. So if you're going to be doing a taped off paint job like this, I recommend using, when I do mine, I like to use two different types of blades. I use like a pretty dull X-Acto knife and a really sharp one. I use the dull one to sort of really push the tape into the crevices and get a real nice sort of alignment with the edges of the blaster, and that's just for like little tweaks. I try to get it in as best as possible, enough to work it with the duller one, then it won't rip. And then if I need to remove excess, I cut it with the really sharp one so that it cuts very cleanly. But now when I paint over this, obviously these areas will stay silver with that like sort of hammered finish, and then the rest of it will be the green color that I've chosen. And this is why you should really take your time taping off. I'm really happy with how this one came out. It's probably my cleanest tape off yet, and the results I think speak for themselves. Now I'm going to do a fair bit of just some slight yellow details, probably the stripe on this side, and then my jam door is actually going to be painted yellow, or battery cover door rather, so I'm not going to probably do too much yellow on this side, and it should balance it out to sort of look like that laser weapon. So I think that maybe that, and then I'm debating on how I want to do my weathering technique, so we will get to that in a little bit. Okay, so I did the yellow stripe by hand as well as the battery cover door that I 3D printed. It's not perfect. I don't really like it as much as the spray paint. I was kind of afraid to mask it off again in case the yellow went over, because that would definitely show up. So I decided to hand paint. However, you can still see a little bit of the brush detail. It's not that big of a deal, but I think next time I'll probably, take the risk and go for a third masking off, or second masking off job to do a third color rather. So for my first round dry brushing, I'm going to use this metallic silver. Basically the technique here is going to be to take a larger paintbrush with a lot of bristles. I'm going to wet it, put a little bit of paint on, sort of wipe most of it off, just gently go over the blaster to sort of give it a sort of worn, scratchy sort of appearance. Not too much, just very little, very light. And then I'm going to use a shop rag to sort of wipe most of it off. So that'll remove a lot of the silver, so the colors will pretty much stay the same, but it'll get little scratches and nicks, and it won't be consistent, so it'll look worn and older. And that's sort of the look that the Fallout blasters have. So I'm going to start doing that. I might also do black as well, but I'm going to start off with the silver and then see how it looks from there. So as you can kind of see here, it's a bit more worn looking, if you look in the reflection especially. There's some imperfections and just minor scratches around the blaster. I went over the words with red and then silver on top of that, and I kind of looked how it almost looked like a rustic burnt out orange. So I sort of did a little bit of red on this side as well, just primarily in the yellow. I think I might do very tiny splotches of like almost like a rust looking color, specifically on, you know, like some of these, just to, you know, make it look a little less perfect. I don't have a rust paint on me, so I'm going to mix orange, red, and maybe a little bit of black just to darken it. But we'll see how that turns out. If I don't like the color, I won't put it on, but just very minute with a lot of water to sort of water it down and make it sink into these scratches a bit. So I'm pretty happy with the rustic looking details, especially on this silver and some of the crevices. It's, again, hard to see because of the large light right above this. However, you can see some very faint rust, and definitely it makes it a lot less shiny, so that'll be good. I plan on clear coating this with 2K and then doing matte over it so that it has a matte finish, but still has the strength of the 2K, so it's good that some of the shininess was kind of reduced by this because it kind of popped against the otherwise matte finish. Up next, I'm going to take the orange Stryfe bits, which I kept orange, like the trigger and the rev trigger and the jam door in the front. Some of that I'm going to sand it very lightly, and then also dry brush that while I have some of the paint that I mixed. So this is the end result of the 2K and then the matte clear coat over it. I'm pretty happy with this. Overall, you know, it doesn't have that like real shiny look that the 2K does, but it still has the level of protection. So this should be a really solid paint job, and it won't be coming off anytime soon, which is fantastic. I always find it ironic, too, when I do a lot of clear coating over something that has a worn look. It's like I don't want my fake scratches to get real scratches. I think I make that joke in pretty much every weathered video. However, I just think it's a little funny. In terms of internals for this blaster, I have an OFP Morpheus cage, and then I have a guide for that. This is a 43.5, so basically like a stock crush, I believe. I'm not sure 43 or 43.5 is stock, but anyway, this is the largest one you can get, so the lowest of the velocities, because I'm going to be using this for an HVZ blaster. For a friend, I have a Foam Blast 3D printed mag release and voltmeter mount. I have a voltmeter that'll go on the inside that'll be activated by the jam door. I have the actual guide for the Morpheus system. I'm going to be using 2 of the Michel 2.0s and some worker wheels I had left lying around. So overall I'm aiming for like the 90 to 110 range, and I feel that this will be a good accurate blaster, but not hit too hard, so it'll be allowed in most HVZ games. This cage is actually printed in PETG, so it's a bit stronger than PLA. It's closer to ABS, but easier to print. And actually, when you get the layer bonding right, the stretchy factor of this plastic is like way higher than most other plastics, so it's a little more flexible, so it should be pretty durable. So as you can see here, I have my aluminum guide for the 3D printed cage installed. I have screwed in my 2 Michel 2.0 motors. The red dots are facing in opposite directions, which is what you want. And the tabs are all still good, so I can wire that up. I'm going to put a little dab of glue on the front just so that that doesn't work its way out, although it's in there pretty darn tight, so I might not even have to do that. And I'm going to push on my worker wheels, and we'll have ourselves a setup. So now it's time to put the internals into the blaster, and then we can call it a day. So I just wired up my cage now, embarrassingly enough, as I do almost every time. I wired it backwards. So this is actually a negative wire in the front and the positive in the back. It sort of, I guess, depends on the motor orientation. However, I always seem to do it backwards the first time. I've also glued in my rev switch here. So now I'm just going to wire the negative lead straight to the battery, and the positive lead will go around to this micro switch, and that'll act as my rev switch. Then from the common, it'll go from the other lead on the switch to the battery, and then when you close the switch, it'll complete the circuit. The voltmeter will also have sort of a similar circuit to make sure that it's not running all the time. We're going to use the stock jam door switch here that normally goes in there, and I'll basically do the same loop. One quick final internal shot before we put the blaster back together. Pause it now if you need to see where any of the pieces go. Anyway guys, I think that's going to wrap up this video on the Fallout 4 Stryfe. I'm pretty happy with the results of it. As you can see here, the video is kind of getting pretty long, and I totally switched all my camera stuff since then, and I want to try some new stuff. So the video for this might already be out, but I'm going to split it into two parts. One is the build, and then one as actually just showing off the final result. Just because, like I said, it's like a completely different film style, and it'd be kind of weird to mix the two. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, or if you feel that I left anything out, please feel free to leave a comment in the comment section down below, and I'll do my best to answer. As always, thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in another video.